Hello and welcome to this Python tutorial. Alright, so in this new code section we are going to implement experience replay. So we're going to make a new class which we will call replay memory, and that will implement experience replay exactly as you saw in the intuition lectures. But first, let's give a quick reminder about what is experience replay. So, all this artificial intelligence is based on Markov decision processes, and Markov decision processes consist of looking at a series of events. So the events are, for example, going from one state st to the next state st plus 1. But if the events were like that, well, since the next state is very correlated to the current state, well, the network would not be learning very well. So for those coming from the deep learning course, that's exactly the same as where we learned our time series with only one time step. It was not learning anything because one time step was not sufficient enough for a model to learn to understand long-term correlations. So that's the same here, and that's why we have to implement experience replay. So how does it work? Well, that's very simple. Instead of only considering the current state, that is only one state at time t, we're going to consider more in the past, so exactly like for our LSTMs, and therefore our series of events will not be st and st plus 1. This will be, for example, the 100 states in the past, so st minus 100, st minus 99, up to st minus 1, and then st. So in other words, we put the 100 last transitions into what we call the memory. And that way we have a long-term memory as opposed to a short-term memory, or even should I say, an instant memory. And that makes the whole deep Q-learning process work much better. And then, once we create this memory of the last 100 events, we will sample, that is, we will take some random batches of these transitions to make our next update, that is, our next move, by selecting the next action. And therefore, in this replay memory class that we're implementing for experience replay, we will make three functions. First of all, the init function, as usual, that's the case for any class. And so in this init function, we will define the variables that will be attached to the future instances of the class, that is the future objects that will be created from this class. And so very simply, these variables will be the memory of the 100 transitions, the 100 events, and the capacity, that is the 100 number. You will be welcome to try a longer memory by increasing the capacity. So that's the first function, init function. And then we'll make two other functions. One push function to make sure that the memory doesn't ever contain more than 100 transitions. And for this, we'll use the capacity by just doing one simple if condition. And then eventually, we will make the sample function, and that will be, of course, to sample some transitions in this memory of the last 100 transitions. All right, so let's start by introducing the class. So as usual, we start with class, and then we give a name to the class. So we call it replay memory. And then in parentheses, we input object. Then colon, and then here we go, we start with the first function, the init function. So that's exactly the same as before. We start with def, then two underscores, init, two underscores again, and then the variables. So there is, of course, self, which is the variable attached to the future instances of the class, the future objects. And then we're going to have another variable for you to be able to try some other experience replay, some other memories. And that's going to be the capacity. So this capacity will simply be the number 100 because we're going to make experience replay with the 100 last transitions. All right, and then colon, and here we go. Let's go inside the function and let's define the variables of our replay memory objects. So the first one will be self.capacity. And as you probably understood, this will be the capacity, that is the maximum number of transitions we want to have in our memory of events. And this will be equal to the argument we will input when creating an object of the replay memory class, and therefore that is capacity. That's the argument of the init function. So capacity, so again, not to be confused, self.capacity is the name of the variable that is attached to the object, and capacity here is the argument we will input when creating an object of the replay memory class. All right, and then we have a second variable. That's, of course, the memory. So self.memory. Alright, and so what will this memory variable be equal to? Well, this memory is supposed to contain the last 100 events, and therefore this should be a simple list. You know, a list which will contain the last 100 events, the last 100 transitions. And to initialize the list, there is nothing more simple. We just add some brackets like that, and here we go, our memory is initialized. So of course, at the beginning of the experiment, or more precisely the beginning of the exploration, the memory will be an empty list, and then we will put the transitions each time we reach a future state. And speaking of that, that's exactly what we'll do with the next function that we're going to call the push function. We will make this push function to append the events in this memory list, and then we'll use the capacity to make sure that this memory list always contains 100 events and never more. Alright, so let's do this in the next tutorial, and until then, enjoy AI!